Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Crummell. A day of mourning. An entire community is remembering the 3 Northern York County Regional Police officers killed in the line of duty last week. They are Detective Mark Baker, Detective Sergeant Cody Becker, and Detective Isaiah Emmenheiser. They are being honored today at the Living Word Community Church just outside Red Lion in York Township. You are looking live as we await the beginning of the funeral service. When that happens, we will bring it to you live. Now, police officers from all over made their way to the service, which is not open to the public. Seth Kaplan live outside the church with more. Good afternoon to you, Seth.
Good afternoon to you, James. Yeah, not only is it not open to the public, but there are so many officers here from so many different agencies all around, not just central Pennsylvania, but the Commonwealth and indeed the country, that you see these folks back here. A lot of them are going to watch the event off-site because this giant church isn't big enough to hold even all the law enforcement officers who would want to be inside, let alone all the rest of us who join them in their grief. A lot of them obvious emotions here, but one thing that strikes me of all the things, you expect to feel certain things as we show you what we've seen this morning here, including not one, not two, but 3 hearses, one after another, officers getting full honors. What struck me was how we've done this before here so recently. It's to the point that we kind of knew what to do when we got here, and there was something unsettling about that, right? Oh, yeah, this church where we were for Officer Duarte just earlier this year. Oh yeah, we knew just where to park with all the other media that are all doing this again. We mentioned last week, James, according to the Officers Down page, which tracks all of this, 34 officers across America have died of gunshot wounds so far this year. 4 of them right here in York County. So 12% of all the officers who have died of gunshot wounds in all of America in this county that has less than 1/10 of 1% of the population. It's just too much for one area, but at least we are joined here by those officers from all over, and there's just something about that, seeing those arm patches walk by. Chicago, everywhere you could imagine, they have all come here, even knowing that they might not be able to get inside the service, priority being given to folks from York County, to folks who knew those officers, folks, of course, from the Northern York Regional Police Department itself. It's one of those, like I said to you, I remember saying this to you last week, James, and I say it again, you and I do words for a living, right? This is what we do. We try to characterize things, and words really, this is another one of those times during this past week that words fail me exactly in 1 week to the moment after we got our first look close up at the scene where this all happened after what went down a day earlier Wednesday.
Now, Seth, you were talking about so many police officers, and we're seeing them behind you just streaming into this service. We do know that there is one special officer there today.
Indeed we do. Wellspan tells us that one of the officers who was injured, so this would be the Northern York officer who was injured. We know both of those officers, that officer, I should say, and the sheriff's deputy are both in satisfactory condition. But indeed, although they have not yet been discharged from the hospital, Wellspan told us that working with doctors and everybody else, thankfully that officer is in good enough condition that they were able to transport that officer here. And so we don't know during the service if there will be special mention, if we'll see that person or not, but pretty poignant to imagine that person who was in the middle of that ambush, one of the 2 officers fortunate to survive and now be in satisfactory condition, recovering well. All of us in life, it's always but for the grace of God, right? But this is somebody who was right there and who was close with all of these 3 men. Northern York, not the tiniest agency, but not a giant agency either, right? Again, when you see those sort of big city, Philadelphia and so forth, officers go by, you know that not everybody in those departments knows absolutely everybody else. Not the case with Northern York, and Chief David Lash is one who has really been there for I could say personally, you know, and we have our interactions with all kinds of law enforcement agencies. He's somebody who, despite it all, even in more routine situations, always does his best to work with us so that we can get the information out there. Haven't yet spoken with him personally this time, and we're going to wait until he's ready. But I know that we will hear from him here sooner or later as well, because he's right there with their families and grieving for these men.
Absolutely. And Seth, you're talking about a very poignant scene as, again, we are waiting for this funeral service to begin. And as you're speaking, you know, we have a little box in the corner of the screen where we're taking a live look inside the church, and something that also very poignant here. You talked about being at that church for the funeral of Andrew Duarte earlier this year. Something very poignant here to me is just seeing their 3 caskets in a row, a joint funeral service, 3 officers killed, all of them being remembered there today.
Everything here has been in threes, right? There was a first hearse that came in. I mean, first there was a procession behind us, so 1, 2, 3 hearses. The entrance to the church is kind of around, from our vantage point here, you would call it the back, and same thing. So there was 1, and there was full honors, and it would be, and you almost felt as if that was the sort of the outside part of the ceremony. It lasted maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And I sort of thought that that's what they were doing for the 3 officers, but no, the first hearse pulled away and they did the same thing for all of them. And there's something about just that, again, that repetition, watching the gentlemen who were you know, playing taps and so forth, having to sort of go back around and do the whole thing again. It's not about numbers, right? I mean, each one of these men meant what they meant to their own family and friends, but then you multiply that by 3 and you can't help but recognize that it is indeed that much worse.
Absolutely. Seth Kaplan, I know you're standing by there outside the Living Word Community Church. We'll check back in with you a little bit later. Thank you so much for that. Now, despite the rain, people in the community lined the streets this morning to pay their respects as the caskets were driven from the funeral home into the church. Our Sarah Wilson, she watched that procession. She joins us live now in York Township with more on that part of the story. Good afternoon to you, Sarah.
James, good afternoon to you. And now, of course, people are here at the Chapel Church in Red Lion to watch the live stream of that service. Again, as Seth had mentioned, it is private, but this church is open and welcoming visitors inside to be able to watch this service. It has been an emotional morning, to say the least, James. One of the things that Seth said that really kind of struck me and is exactly what I was thinking was the repetition of this. You watched each of the caskets come out of the funeral home, and it was incredibly emotional. And then, of course, you do it 2 more times with family and friends standing there and watching. There were hundreds of officers and mourners that lined West Broadway as Detective Sergeant Cody Becker, Detective Mark Baker, and Detective Isaiah Emmenheiser were escorted to the Living Word Community Church. Their remains were individually carried out of the funeral home and into the hearse, as I mentioned, each by 6 members of law enforcement, all separately, taking about the span of 20 minutes. Family and friends stood back and watched. So did so many Red Lion residents who came out to show their support.
Everybody came together and supported what was lost in our country, in our world, and it was very important to have something like that, because without it, it's just another story, and that's not okay. I think this is well needed for what we need right now as a country.
And that gentleman who you just heard from was actually getting his haircut when the procession came by, and he and many others in that barbershop had kind of stopped what they were doing, came outside to watch this procession for the fallen officers. The officers at the church will now be taken back to the funeral home. There are private services, we're told, later next week for family and friends. And James, of course, we're going to have much more coverage on this coming up tonight at 5 and 6.
Absolutely. So, Sarah, just like Seth, you have been covering this story from the very beginning, and you yourself, you've witnessed several different processions and memorials as people line the streets, especially I remember on the night that this actually happened. Can you just talk about the emotions that went into play when you watched the procession there today, the actual caskets, 3 of them in the hearses going down the street there?
Yeah, that was very emotional, James, obviously. You see literally hundreds of officers who are outside lining the streets and many others who are coming out of the funeral building, and they're each carrying these caskets that are draped in American flags, and then very ceremonial, very well planned out, and then loading, you know, the caskets into the hearse, and you think, okay, that one has been, you know, completed, and that police officer was honored. Now we have to do it 2 more times. I can't even imagine how the family and friends of each of these officers were feeling, because like Seth said, obviously, you know, it's not about numbers, but it really was incredible and heart-wrenching to just see these 3 caskets escorted out in such an honorable and ceremonial way, with so much emotion surrounding you know, the family and friends that were there. And of course, we saw that with the procession that had occurred last week as well, when these 3 men were escorted to and from the coroner's office.
Absolutely. All right, Sarah Wilson, thank you very much, live for us there as well. We'll check back with you as well. Thank you very much for that.
Hi, I'm Eric Finkenbinder from ABC 27. We're excited to announce the new ABC 27 News Plus app. Live stream newscasts or watch content on demand. This is different than the ABC 27 app on your smartphone. You can check this out at home, and it's very easy to use. With a Fire Stick, go to the home page, scroll down to search. From there, enter ABC 27. Move over to the apps, and there we are. Click the icon and install. It's just that easy.